Thank you, Suzanne, for bringing us into this time of worship together. Our words of welcome today come from my colleague, the Reverend Elizabeth Stevens, who is a minister in what's known as the Palouse or Moscow, Idaho. She wrote these words after the 2018 election. Oh, my dear ones, I know you were hoping for a once and done, for an earthquake, a tidal wave, hoping that if we gave it our all, a single push would be enough. That after this, we could sink back into complacency, back into the comfort of our privilege. I confess, in the secret corners of my heart, I wanted it to believe that it could be that easy, that justice would emerge from an egg fully grown, not with wet down and weak wings. But beloveds, we are chipping away at a mountain, not a boulder, calcified structures created to oppress, control, kill. Thousands of years with this stupid idea that some are more worthy, some deserve power by virtue of who they are, what they look like, what tribe they claim. Erosion is slow work, sweethearts. Celebrate the progress, the triumphs. Celebrate also the heartbreaking almosts. Breathe, rest for a time. Then get up and turn toward kindness, toward your neighbor in need, toward those who are still trapped in the stone. Tell them, I won't give up. Tell them, I am with you. Tell them, for you, I will learn to eat rocks. For you, I will keep chewing, keep grinding until the mountain crumbles to dust. Welcome to worship with the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene, Oregon. My name is the Reverend Lois Van Leer, she, her, hers, and it is my privilege to be leading worship today with my colleagues, Jennifer Hackett, our ministerial intern who's based in Nashville, Tennessee, with our director of music, Mitch Davey, on guitar over here, and our very talented accompanist, Suzanne Giordano, and our amazing tech person, Kat Johnson. Katie Seipert is off this week. She is catching up on her seminary homework. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If you're returning to us after a time away, welcome. If this is your religious and spiritual home, welcome. It is indeed good to be together.
How can one tiny chalice flame shine through such heavy clouds? How can one tiny chalice flame guide us out of the smoke of confusion and despair? How can one tiny chalice flame make a difference? Believe me when I tell you that one tiny chalice flame has saved lives, inspired acts of courage and resistance, quieted the mantra of suffering, led hundreds home to their most authentic selves. Trust this one tiny chalice flame is yours for the taking. Give it your faith and pass it on. Please join us in singing hymn number 352, Find a Stillness.
Our call to worship today comes from the Reverend Angela Herrera, who is our minister at our Albuquerque church in New Mexico. She writes, "Don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards, and the world needs vision. Bring them with you, and your joy, and your passion, and your courage, and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your power to heal. There is work to do, and you have all that you need to do it right here in this space." I invite you to enjoy a sung invocation, our UUCE's virtual choir doing a rendition of Bobby McFerrin's version of the 23rd Psalm.
Absolutely beautiful choirs. Listen to the words of Valerie Carr from her book, See No Stranger. This is for anyone who feels breathless. Maybe moving through this world in your body is enough to make you feel constriction in your chest. Maybe you're holding someone close to you who is struggling and suffering. Maybe you are reeling from the last mass shooting, or the refugee crisis at the border, or the looming threat of climate change, or the blistering pace of a global pandemic. Maybe, like me, you are breathless from all of the above. I thought my breathlessness was a sign of my weakness until a wise friend told me what I wish to tell you. Your breathlessness is a sign of your bravery. It means you are awake to what's happening right now. The world is in transition.
So, isn't it a relief this morning not to be checking election maps on different news sites, or to be able to turn off the TV or the radio rather than being glued to either of, or both of them for what feels like months? And yet there's very little in some ways that could be called a decisive, clear victory in this presidential election. As every political pundit has noted, and we are quite aware of, there was no blue wave. But more importantly, said leadership expert Dov Seidman, there was no moral wave, no repudiation of moral decay. And in an opinion piece that appeared on November 4th in the New York Times, Thomas Friedman said that even though we didn't yet know who was the actual winner of the presidential election, what we did know was who was the loser. And he said it was the United States of America. He went on to say that we have just experienced 4 years of the most divisive and dishonest presidency in American history, which attacked the twin pillars of our democracy, truth and trust. Donald Trump has not spent a single day of his term trying to be president of all of the people. And he has broken rules and trashed norms in ways that no other president ever dared. Right up to Tuesday night, when he falsely claimed election fraud and summoned the Supreme Court to step in and stop the voting, as if such a thing were even remotely possible. You know, once again, those polls failed us as accurate predictors of the outcome of the election. And of course they did. When what is at stake is the erosion of truth, truth itself often goes missing. And though some Trump supporters fit the stereotype of the rough, redneck, gun-toting, uneducated evangelicals, there are those that don't. They are our family members. They're our neighbors, they're parents of our children's classmates, they're educated, and all those other kind of stereotypes. We may not think we know anyone who voted for Trump, but perhaps the truth is, folks have lied about who they were intending to vote for and who they did vote for, because they have hidden their convictions as if they know on some subconscious level that there's something wrong about supporting Trumpism, that there is in fact something shameful in it. Jamel Bowie wrote in his opinion piece on November 5th in the New York Times that Trumpism is a performance of nationalism, one that triangulates between open chauvinism in favor of the dominant ethnic group and narrow appeals to inclusion, with the promise of material gain for anyone who joins his coalition. It is a performance on the same score of success, projecting an image of wealth and power and urging the public to embrace it as its own, a version of The Apprentice in which the contestants are the American people. It is also the performance of an aggressive and aggrieved masculinity centered on the bullying and domination of others. Trumpism appeals to tens of millions of voters, from the large majority of white Americans to many people in traditionally Democratic constituencies. And that, if anything, is the surprise of this election. It was in the late 1980s that I first became aware that there are two Oregons. There's that I-5 corridor between Portland and here in Eugene, and then there's the rest of the state. And that I-5 corridor, with its population, tended to carry the state. Since that time, we have come to see that there are not just two Oregons, but two Americas, the coasts and the rest of the country. The first slanting blue, the latter red. Listen to the words of Black author Roxane Gay, who defines these two Americas. She writes, in one, people are willing to grapple with racism and bigotry. We acknowledge that women have a right to bodily autonomy, that every American has a right to vote and the right to health care and the right to a fair living wage. We understand that this is a country of abundance and that the only reason economic disparity exists is because of the continued government refusal to tax the wealthy proportionally. The other United States is committed to defending white supremacy and patriarchy at all costs. Its citizens are the people who believe in QAnon conspiracy theories and take Mr. Trump's misinformation as gospel. They see America as a country of scarcity, where there will never be enough of anything to go around, so it's every man and woman for themselves. They're not concerned with the collective, because they believe that any success they achieve by virtue of their white privilege is achieved by virtue of merit. They see equity as oppression. What this election made clear is Friedman's description of us as a country with multiple compound fractures. A country where we cannot do anything ambitious anymore because ambitious things need to be done together. He says we can't even come together to all wear masks in a pandemic when health experts tell us it would absolutely save lives. It would be so simple, so easy, and so patriotic to say, I protect you and you protect me. And yet we can't do it. Though there were victors and victories this past week, we, the American people, lost. We lost the illusion that people had seen the light, that enough folks had been hurt by the past 4 years that they would have voted, quote, our way. Many have lost faith in our electoral college, our political system, our government, our law enforcement, in any effective way to help us recover from the pandemic of COVID. and the possibility of economic recovery for all and not just those who are wealthy, because greed has superseded protections and rights. And folks haven't just lost their jobs, they've lost their professions, they've lost a way of life. And we have lost our childlike innocence again. There's so many fractures in our institutions and structures and culture that we're all living with compounded pain, layer upon layer of grief. As the poet Adrienne Rich so simply stated, my heart is moved by all that I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. So much of what we have taken for granted has been lost, from things like simple decency and civility to entire species and the silence, the notion of silence in wild places. This time of COVID, the pandemic of COVID, has taught us anything. It's what we value most and what we cannot live without. And I think for most of us, that can be summed up in the word connection, contact, relationship, physical human contact and interaction. How many of us are living without human touch? Or perhaps you fear that you're not going to live long enough to outlive COVID so that you can actually worship again in the physical space of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene. I will most likely be ending my career, 38 years in ministry, by never preaching in a pulpit again. Our world has been turned on its head. Walking outside in the presence of other humans holds potential danger. Living with the unrelenting underlying fear of being exposed to, contracting, or spreading the coronavirus has taken its toll. Because now we have to look at one another as a potential threat. And that erodes human relationship. And I wonder, will we ever see the smiles of people that we pass again? Or will we always be behind masks, unable to fully read facial expressions? Now, I don't usually quote from the National Review publication, but when its editor wrote this past week that Trump, for many people, he's the only middle finger available to raise at this confusing and distorted and terrifying world. And after I read that, I kind of gained just the tiniest insight into those who vote differently from me, because their first response is not to access sadness or sorrow or disappointment. It's to go to anger and blame and to raise the middle finger. But in this day of compound fractures, trying to pin the blame is like trying to pin the tail on a donkey that's untethered. And progressives, liberals, resistors, we aren't the only ones who are in pain or suffering from grief. Think about it, all of America, with all of this grief, and nowhere to go with it, nowhere to take it. Prior to COVID, Katie and I had been planning to build a wall of lamentation at UUCE. For even before COVID and this election, it was clear that the compound fractures of people's lives needed a place to somehow be taken, to be acknowledged, to be held. And the idea for this came from the Western or Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, that is a sacred site for Jews. For there's the rabbinic belief that the divine presence never departs from the Western Wall. Now, I've since done a little bit of digging into the history of that wall because I didn't want to misappropriate a tradition that's not ours. And that digging led to the discovery that there's no ancient Jewish tradition that designates the Western Wall as a sacred site. It was actually designated as a site of prayer less than 500 years ago, and it was done so by a Muslim leader. It took more than 3 centuries for the wall to attract the Jewish masses. And it's only been in the last 150 years that it's become Judaism's most sacred site. You may be familiar with the images of Orthodox Jews reading from the Hebrew scriptures and davening or praying at the wall. And tourists who make the pilgrimage to the Holy Land tuck slips of paper with written prayers or wishes into the wall's cracks. I want Unitarian Universalists to have a similar place or space for our lamentations, because we too have need of such a place, especially now with the inlay of compounded fractures and compounded grief in our lives. There's something about that ritual of writing down one's prayers or wishes, or even the things one wishes to let go of or release, and place them in the cracks of a wall or a structure that may not have a perpetual divine presence. But these are times that cry out for ritual. For ritual structures, how we celebrate and how we mourn, how we are supportive to one another, how we can be vulnerable, how we connect. Ritual invites us into a new way of being. It carries within it the ability to take what is broken and transform it. It can shift what is present to what can be. It can be a way of remembering, of calling ourselves home. In a recent workshop, Frank Ostasecky named what he called disenfranchised grief. He said that as a society, we're not permitted to grieve, that we've become separated from so much in these times, and that separation includes separation from grief. So think about all these messages that we've been receiving recently. The message that no matter what the outcome of the presidential election, we have work to do. We need to start yesterday. Now hurry up, get to work, fix it, heal it. And I want to say stop. For none of that can happen until we allow ourselves to take that disenfranchised grief and allow ourselves to feel it. Because then and only then can we do what Adrienne Rich writes about after she acknowledges that my heart is moved by all I cannot save, so much has been destroyed. She goes on to write, I have cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. That is our hope, and that is our work. But first, so importantly, we need to allow ourselves our grief. I so wish we were able to gather physically together today, because I think we need to allow ourselves to be in front of a metaphorical wailing wall, to weep, to lament, to let go. There's a phenomenal book that was published in 1987, and it was called The Screaming Room, A Mother's Journal of Her Son's Struggle with AIDS, a true story of life, dedication, and courage. The author, a mother, took care of her son in her home as he slowly died of complications from HIV. And this young man contracted everything from fungal infections to becoming blind, to becoming demented. And what the author wanted during that time was a place that she could go to just scream her pain and her grief. A safe place where a person can wail and cry and weep and scream and even roll around in their grief. She called it a screaming room. I call it a wailing room. There are and there will be times in our lives when we will all need a wailing room. And what we can offer as Unitarian Universalists here in Eugene is a wall of lamentation for you. I so wish that we could gather together today, because before we get to work on reconstituting the world, we have to prepare ourselves. And as Unitarian Universalists, I see that we do that through ritual. because ritual creates the space for the impossible to become possible. It's not magic. It embodies our intention. I also wish that we could be present with one another in community today, because after the grieving, I think we need to bless one another so we can do that work of reconstituting the world. The fiber of that work is what some call love beyond belief, and what the Sikh author and lawyer Valerie Carr calls revolutionary love. And in the introduction to her book that Mitch also read a quote from, she writes, "Revolutionary love is the choice to enter into wonder and labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves, to transform the world around us. It's not a formal code or a prescription, but an orientation to life that is personal and political and rooted in joy. Loving only ourselves is escapism. Loving only our opponents is self-loathing. Loving only others is ineffective. Yet all three practices together make revolutionary love. And revolutionary love can only be practiced in community." My sense is that we long for community today, and in particular this community. And if we are to grieve and practice revolutionary love, we need ritual. Katie and I will get that wall together soon. But for now, for today, I'd like us to engage in a ritual of blessing of ourselves. So if you're able, I'd like you to join me in physically doing what I'm going to lead us through. And if you're not able to physically do any of the ritual, do it in your mind's eye. Run it through your mind. I believe it's just as effective. And it's based on a ritual that was developed by some nurses, I believe in California. And they did it because they were caring for COVID patients who were dying alone, because their families and their friends, their religious folks couldn't come visit them. And so they did this ritual with the body of those who had died before they were taken away, so that they could acknowledge each life. So hopefully you're sitting or you're standing, and I want you to take your hands and I want you to cup them over your face. And I want you to let your fingers touch your temples, the place that wraps a part of your brain, and silently say, "It is blessed." Touch your closed eyes that have perhaps brought you beauty, and silently say, "They are blessed." Touch your ears that have perhaps heard the delight of voices or music or the wind, and silently say, "They are blessed." Touch your nose, that is the gateway to your breath or spirit, and silently say, "It is blessed." Touch your lips that have perhaps spoken truth, and silently say, "They are blessed." Touch your cheeks that have been stretched in laughter, and at the same time have let tears slide, and say, "They are blessed." Let your arms cross and move to your shoulders, that place where you have carried burdens and strengths, and silently say, "They are blessed." Let your crossed arms slide down over your heart, that place of love from which we all begin and to which we all return, and silently say, "It is blessed." I ask you to look at or feel your hands. Look at or feel the wrinkles, the scars, the age marks, the veins, each finger, knuckle to knuckle. Turn them over and look at or feel your palms. Feel the smooth or the rough of them. Can you find your lifeline? Can you feel it? Remember all that your hands have done. Calmed a child, wiped a tear. Maybe they've hammered or sewn, pushed through water, held another's hand, lifted objects, created art, prepared food, caressed another, run along the bark of a tree, gushed in mud, let coarse sand pour through their cupping, swept, raked, dug, planted, picked, harvested, sanded, soothed. The list is endless, isn't it? And take another moment. Remember all those things those hands did. Thank them. Prepare them for revolutionary love. Bless them. For yes, after the grieving, there is much for them to do. Blessed, blessed be. I know I'm supposed to be doing a prayer to sum up everything, but I'm too busy reading everything that people are putting in the chat. I guess I just want to sum everything up by saying welcome to those of you who are new and have found us. You identify yourself as stranger, but you don't need to call yourself stranger. You can call yourself part of this community. Gratitude to your professional staff who have been spending weeks, trying to figure out how we're going to respond in a worshipful, ritualized way to whatever events might happen. Thanks to Mitch and to Jennifer and to Suzanne and to Katie. Thank you to all of you who have participated in the process of ensuring one of our principles that democracy can work. An awareness lifted up in the joys and sorrows shared that the work is to begin. There's plenty of it to do. And I'm glad that some of you are letting yourself access the grief first. May we all go forth, buoyed by this community, knowing that we are standing on the backs and shoulders of people who've come before us, who have survived even worse imaginably. Can you imagine that there's worse than what we've been going through? There has been. May we work that our world may be healed, that people may be healed, and that we can find some kind of wholeness even when so much is fractured. Take good care of yourself and take care of one another in this week to come. May it be so. So be it. Blessed be.
Please join us in singing our closing hymn, number 123, Spirit of Life.
These are words by Megan Ruth Visser that were inspired by the Reverend Elena Rose Vera. Nothing is over. Take a breath, take a minute, feel your feelings, then get back in the fight. The fight is harder, but the fight is the same, and it needs you, and it needs me, and it needs us. The stakes could not be higher. And the world we hope for doesn't happen if we don't make it. We fight the fights that need fighting, not just the fights we're sure we can win. We do what needs doing, and we make a way out of no way. We get miracles by being each other's miracles. We get chances by making chances. We get hope by doing the work of hope. May it be so, and blessings on each of you.